The council study session for the morning of Thursday, April the 15th. All of our council is present. I believe we have Mr. Thompson with us via Zoom. Are you with us, Mr. Thompson? Okay. Yeah, there he is. Sorry. There we go. Kevin, can you hear us? That's right. He's apparently just across the parking lot on top of the hotel. Hi, Kevin. You're with us.
Yes, Mayor, I am.
Okay, thank you. All of our council is here. The first item on our agenda is to review and discuss items on the agenda for our Monday night, April the 19th regular council meeting. I know they have a few questions. Mr. Luna, let's begin with you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was wondering if I could speak on 4B. I know that that's part of the renovation of the Red Mountain Park, and I imagine this is probably just the start of the project. And if you could just explain briefly what's going on here.
Good morning, Mayor and Councilmember Luna. Yes, we are just getting started on Red Mountain. We are in the design process right now. Typically we try to bring our contractors on these large projects on at about 30% design, which is where we are today. The contract on the agenda is to bring the contractor on board to help us with cost estimating and making sure we're keeping the project in budget. We are looking to start construction after the first of the year. It's a 20-month project, so probably completing in the fall of 2023.
Thank you, Beth. I know there's a lot of excitement. We've had some community meetings with many of the residents in and around that, and the improvements on the park are certainly going to be welcome. So thank you for leading that effort and making sure that we meet the needs of the community as well as have an outstanding park.
Thank you.
You know, this is exciting just to read this agenda item, just to remind everybody that this is the park bond that was approved a year or two ago by our 2018. So it's going to be 10 lighted soccer fields, 4 lighted baseball, softball fields, along with restrooms and storage and landscaping. So that's really going to, we all have talked about what the shortage of lighted ballparks that we have and sports fields. Many of our youth sports teams just don't have the opportunity to practice and play the games that they'd like to. So that's exciting. Thanks for pointing that out, Mr. Luna. Council, other questions on Monday's agenda? I'm sorry, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just real quick, I just wanted to highlight that on, I think it's 5N, we're approving, as far as the Mesa Education Workforce Development Roundtable, we've included EVIT to be part of that, and I think that's real important that we have somebody that represents a career and technical education component to that roundtable. So thank you for that.
Thank you for pointing that out. Again, this was, you recall, we passed this resolution maybe at our last meeting, and I think it was pointed out by council that this would be a good improvement. I think it was Mr. Thompson who made this recommendation. So we're following that advice and adding EVIT to that organization. Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, on 4C, it's about the cameras on platforms. I know we've had 1 or 2 in the city, and they've done a world of good at Alma School, Maine, and Pioneer Park. I see that we're buying some additional ones, 4 more systems. Do we know those locations?
Vice Mayor, 4C, I think that item, that may be an older agenda because that item, unfortunately, got pulled. There's a protest on that purchase.
Okay, somehow it got stuck in my notes. And
oh, sorry. Yeah, it was on I think it was probably on the agenda that went out earlier, and then the vendor is we're going through a review of their protest on the purchase. So I apologize for that.
Okay.
When we bring that up, I would appreciate you asking that question again.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just continue on to the other questions. Don't worry, I won't run out. 5I, facilities maintenance on overhead communications, Quest and Centurylink, Levy Centurylink. And I know we've had inactive wires and such in many of the older neighborhoods, and there's been some questions posed to me. I just want to understand a little bit more about what we're doing here.
So what Centurylink has requested is that they be allowed to go in and overlash up to 288 fiber strand over the top of their copper wires in an area that's bounded by Lindsay on the east and Southern on the south, which is where most of our overhead lines are in Mesa from the years past. As part of this agreement, when they came to us, we said, well, we're interested in that if you can serve underserved or not served areas of the community. Councilmember Heredia was involved in the discussions so we could ensure that that became part of the agreement. They have agreed to that, and we've seen some map overlays that would indicate that they could then get fiber with up to 1G speeds in areas where they currently have old copper that doesn't really get them the speeds in those areas. So the agreement is based on that. In addition, what we were able to negotiate, and it's going to be essential for them to do, to be able to overlash a fiber wire, which actually ties the two together, the copper and the fiber above. They're going to have to go in and renovate some of the older parts of their system, which means raising wires, putting additional support in for the new fiber on top of the copper, and in general, just kind of cleaning up the system. And that system is very aged, as we can tell when we drive down the street. There are some low-hanging wires, there are some extra poles, there are some things like that that need to be corrected before they can attach the fiber to it. So as part of the agreement, they have agreed to do that as well. So we are hoping to get a much cleaner look to some of the aerials in West Mesa.
So this would just apply to the area in which they're integrating the new fiber, but not to any existing areas where we have inactive wires, and so we're just an ongoing struggle to clean up those areas.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, this is kind of a first step. If we can get some of these areas addressed as they go through and attach the fiber, that's kind of just, one step at a time. Centurylink is part of the original Mountain Bell system, and so they don't have an agreement with us like Cox does in parts of the city. So this gives us an agreement where we can go in and ask them to correct things in the areas where they're putting the fiber.
So what areas is this? You said Lindsay and Southern, but
it's a large area. They're looking at evaluating 10,000 homes this year for service to fiber. So it's basically Lindsay on the east and Southern on the south, and it's that corner of Mesa. I can show you a map afterward if you'd like to see the area that they're talking about, but it's really where all the overhead wires are today. Okay. And they won't be doing every neighborhood. We'll know more this year as they evaluate the 10,000 homes for service. They hope to be providing the service and doing the install next year.
Good, great. The next question I had was on 5J, which applies to the Mason Town Center Improvement District and the assessments. And my question, I don't know if Nancy is here or Jeff, or maybe I can follow up on the question if no one is here to answer it. If we have the same assessments as last year?
Yes. This is just a continuation. Next year, there'll be a whole new kind of reset, and I think it's coming up for renewal. So this year is just a continuation from the previous. I think when it references in that caption, the proposed final assessments do not include any rate increases. Right. So whatever was applied before in this previous year will continue. Next year will be, I think DMA is going to go through a whole reassessment of the district and the size of the district and the rates and the services and all that will happen next year.
Great, great. With our development and growth, I know keeping the assessments static will not serve the area, and we have vacant properties as well, which actually pose more work than the ones that are active. Right. Anyway, there's a lot of things that we have to adjust to the developing downtown, so I'm glad that we'll
and I think we'll have to have those conversations early in the process because there's all kinds of notices and hearings that have to happen prior to this action with the community if we were to make those changes.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heredia.
On the issue of the Centurylink, Beth, you said their work as far as timeline is for next year. Is there a plan to reach out to the customers, the residents there, and that they'll have upgraded services potentially if they want to use those?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Heredia. As part of what they're going to start next year, there'll also be a marketing campaign with the rollout of the fiber.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe 5K. Frank, if you could come up, 5K is about the PPAs that we're having with the city electric. And maybe my question is, has there been any disruption in the energy market? And are we paying more for power than previously? And this is a 5-year contract, or up to 5 years, with the related agencies delivering that. So what's your, after you've gone through this assessment, what's your thought about delivering power to our 17,000 people in our city?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Frank McRae with the Energy Resource Department. Clearly, the market has changed dramatically just in the last year from what we've seen in prior years. In prior years, we've been able to continually reduce our energy supply cost and flow those reduced costs through our customers, but that looks like it's changed. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the types of cost we're getting in responses to our competitive proposals that we request for proposals that we send out. Tony Cadoran's joining me. He's the one who's managing that process and has more detailed information. But I would say we are preparing to do different things this year. We're preparing plans to ask our customers to conserve energy to reduce those costs. We're reaching out to suppliers that typically do not participate in those competitive solicitations directly rather than through the RFP process, to see if they have ways of supplying us power at a lower cost than what we're seeing in response to our proposals.
Okay. And I know we're dependent on those suppliers out there in the market. So maybe, Anthony, has there been any changes that you've seen that?
Mayor, council member. Yeah, I just echo what Frank said. We are seeing changes in the energy market, and we're doing all we can to insulate our customers from that. We are taking new approaches to things. We mentioned at a prior meeting that we're looking at large-scale solar to help bring costs down. We're looking at microgrid concepts that leverage our natural gas capacity, and like Frank said, asking our customers to help conserve, so we're keeping them out of using energy in those peak electricity times to keep costs down.
Does this part, any renewable energy that you're purchasing today on these contracts, does this involve any renewables, or is it just strictly typical power purchases?
This would be a conventional power purchase.
Conventional, okay.
Yeah. We did get pricing on renewables, but there is a cost premium to that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Council, other questions about Monday's agenda, rather? Yes, I'm sorry, Mr.
I do have one. 8A will probably come off consent, and that's the waypoint.
It's not on consent.
It's not on, okay.
Okay.
And maybe Nana, great. Is that why you're here? You got the saddle?
Yes, sir.
He could give us an update. I have worked with the neighborhood, and they have not given us back a response on the good neighbor policy. However, we've gotten some architectural updates for the garage that's concerning to the neighbors, and it's a great improvement compared to what was previously. So with that, Nana?
Good morning, Mayor, Council. So the last time we discussed this item, there were 3 items that we were looking for the applicant to provide to us. One was a good neighbor policy, which basically is to address the landscaping maintenance, the lighting controls in the garage and on the property, noise attenuation measures, and also how they're going to respond to any complaints. And then the second item was landscaping improvement, where we asked the applicant to increase the size of the trees, which they have done. And then the third item that was remaining was the elevations. This project went to the design review board in October, and the design review board had recommended changes or revisions to the elevations. And as of a couple of weeks ago, the applicant was still working on it, but we did revise elevations, and that really meets the revisions that they had received, or the recommended revisions they had received from the design review board. So what you're looking at, it shows the elevations are not flat. It shows kind of three-dimensional way of putting the screening and also breaks. And that's one of the things the design review board wanted to make sure. And it also helps to block any light shining from the garage onto adjacent properties. Again, this is another side of the elevations. This is how it's going to look at. So you see the breaks, kind of the three-dimensional way of laying the screening, and also they've added some kind of break here to break the mass of the structure. And this idea, they were basically aiming to mimic this example, which is a biomedical building garage in Phoenix. So if you look at this, it blocks the light. It's also not very obtrusive. And so that was kind of the idea behind the revised elevations, which meets the recommendations from the design review board. So as part of this project, the design review approval is going to have a condition of approval to make sure that they build this garage, they comply with a good neighbor policy, and the landscaping plan is also submitted. That's the update I have.
Thank you. And we're still, again, waiting for the neighborhood's response to the good neighbor policy to see if any of that can be incorporated into it. So,
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, that's correct. We did email the good neighbor policy to the neighborhood 2 weeks ago, and we're still waiting to see any changes or anything they may have to add to it.
okay. And that's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Freeman and to Nana for working closely with this neighborhood. I know this has been a case we've been working with for a few meetings now, and so I just appreciate, and I know members of council have gone out and visited the property and spoke with the neighborhood. I just want to express our appreciation for that.
And just to tag on, this isn't, going to be perfect for the neighbors, but it's the best we can do. And I think this is just a site plan approval, right? I mean, it's.
Mayor, council members, it's a rezoning. It's an amendment to the plan area development on the property, which is a rezoning.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Council, other questions for Monday night? Mr. Thompson, you good? Great, great. Thanks. We do have a large agenda for this meeting, and I know we also have several appointments with staff and council beginning a little before 10 o'clock. So we'll plow through as much of this agenda as possible. Hopefully we'll make it through everything, but there's a possibility that if you're towards the end of the agenda, you might get to come back and be a part of another meeting. So we'll try to be as efficient as we can be with our time this morning. Next item on our agenda is presentations and actions items. Item 2A is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction for the city's secondary property tax rate and levy for the fiscal year 2021 and 2022. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Great to be with you this morning. My name is Mike Kennington. I'm one of our city's deputy city managers and the chief financial officer. To my right is Ryan Wimmer, the city's treasurer. Today, Ryan will be taking us through two separate but related topics. The first is the proposed primary or secondary property tax rate and levy. The second topic is our capital financing plan for this year. Ryan?
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Council. It's good to be here with you. As Mike mentioned, I'm Ryan Wimmer. I'm the city treasurer, and I wanted to start today by just reminding us all that although the city does not have a primary property tax to fund city operations, we do have a secondary property tax, which is limited in use to paying for debt service or making payments on general obligation bonds. So that's what we're going to talk about today is the secondary property tax levy for next fiscal year 21-22. So you'll recall that in November of last year, Mesa voters approved a $100 million transportation bond, referred to as Mesa Moves, and that bond is funded by the secondary property tax levy. Back in May of last year, when the council was considering calling this election question, the estimate that we provided at that time for the increase to the annual impact to the median value homeowner was $28. So because of the new bonds, the property tax impact to the median homeowner we were estimating to be $28. Fortunately, that $28, as we go to actually implement it this year, approve it this year for next fiscal year, there's some factors that are offsetting that cost, that are reducing the impact of that cost. Namely, new property that has been constructed or annexed in the last year in the city, which broadens the base of property value and spreads that cost over additional property, would reduce that impact by $4. Bond refunding savings, the last year and this year we've refunded bonds, meaning we've refinanced at lower interest rates, and those lower costs are also helping to offset the impact of the increase by another $4. And then another group of, this is really a grouping of everything else, but savings on prior issuances, really made up mostly of low borrowing costs and high collection rates. The low borrowing costs, we've been in a period in the last several years of historically low interest rates. You've seen it everywhere throughout the economy and in the recession that we've been having this last year and a half. Also, the city last year, for the first time, I think in its history, had received a AAA rating on our general obligation bond debt, which is the highest possible rating that exists. And so with a higher rating comes better rates, because investors have more confidence that the city will repay or pay the debt service on the bonds. So the borrowing costs have been very low. Collection rates, we were a little fearful last year with the pandemic, the recession, that it might really affect people's ability to pay property tax. What we saw was a reduction from about 99% payment to about 98%. So it really didn't have a large impact. And we assume about 95%, so it did not, it didn't hurt us. In fact, it helped us. So with that $10 reduction, you see the net impact of the 2020 transportation bonds is only $10. And when we talk about property tax, it's hard to remember this formula, but it's important to review. Really, the way property tax is calculated, it's the value of the property times the tax rate, which equals the tax levy or the tax bill. So in this table, you can see that the taxable value from this year to next year has gone up from, has gone up $254 million. So you've all probably experienced in your home values, the values have appreciated.
Ryan, can we, I think Mr. Freeman has a question for you.
Ryan, when you talk about the bond refunding savings and savings on prior issuances, to me, I think about, well, how much money is that? Is there a dollar value attached to that?
Yes.
I mean, to kind of, pat ourselves on the back to kind of, we're trying to save money and reduce our, to pay off our bonds and things like that. So can we have a dollar amount maybe?
You want to get that from later?
Or do you have it in the presentation?
I do later, a total for both geo and utility, yes.
Good, my bad.
That's a great point.
But I think if you just put in there like in parentheses, like, hey, we saved $15 million,
right.
I would ask the question.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Freeman. We'll do that in the future, and yeah, we do have it in a later slide. So values have increased from going into next year by $254 million. 168 of that is appreciation, but 86 million of about a third of that is new property. So this is the complicated table here. If you just bear with me, we'll walk through it a little bit. But the bolded numbers in the top part of the table are the proposed levy and rate for next year, that $45 million and the $1.13. So the tax levy, the top line, that's the total amount we need to collect in order to pay the debt service on the general obligation bonds that have been authorized. And that increase of $3.5 million is to pay for these new 2020 transportation bonds that were passed. So that's an increase, if you look at that right column, of 8% of additional levy. And if you look at the next line, the taxable value, that's what we just looked at on the prior slide, but that increased by 7%. So really, that makes up 7% of that 8%. And if you look at the third line, the rate, it only has to increase by 1% in order to make an 8% increase in the levy. So the proposed tax rate increase is only 1.5 cents. If you look at that second to last column, 0.0148, which is only 1%, which is we're pretty pleased with that we're able to do that. The annual impact, the annual cost of the medium homeowner increased. There's that $10 bolded in that second to last column on that last row, and that's a 6% increase to the annual cost of the medium homeowner. Any questions on that table?
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Yes. What is the median homeowner?
That's a very good question, and it's a little tricky to answer because there's two values, Mayor, Vice Mayor Duff. Let me just say this, the median sale value, I'll just cut to the chase. The median sale value for going into next year is $279,000. So if you were to sell your property, that's the sale value. The properties you receive from the assessor's office, there's two values you receive from them. Neither of them are that value. They're both discounted for various reasons, but that's the actual value of the property. So this is a little history of the tax levy and rate in the city going back 7 years. You can see since 1516 it was the rate is the red line and the blue bar is the levy, and you can see how the blue bar stays flat for quite a few years going back. The levy was held steady because there weren't any new GO bond elections, general obligation bond elections. So the rate was falling as property values increased each year, driving the rate down to collect the same levy. And then in 2018, there was the Parks and Culture and Public Safety bond election, which increased the levy and rate. And then again, for next year's proposed levy and rate, the impact of the 2020 election. You can see how modest that impact is. The rate, even with the increase for next year, is going to be lower than many of the past 7 years. So going forward, today is the first item on this calendar, but we'll be posting a report as required by statute 60 days before the levy is adopted to basically give the public notice that we plan to increase the tax rate for next year. And so that will be posted either today or early next week. And so we wanted to give you a heads up today that's happening. And then by June 6th, we need to publish that same information on the website and via social media, so you'll see that. And then the budget process, there's a public hearing on the budget and levy, and then the adoption of the budget and adoption of the levy.
So Ryan, so as council members may get called from constituents when they hear this, their rate will go up based on that 1% number, is that correct?
Yes.
So they'll hear that. But what we often focus on, because rate's sometimes hard to translate, what does rate actually mean? I always like to use, the pocketbook analysis is the $10. So that's how they may hear there's a tax rate increase, and there is, but at the end of the day, the median home, and remember, you're just smack dab in the middle. For some people, it's going to be higher depending on the value of their home. But I think I always translate that, well, what that means is $10 more for the whole year to add $100 million worth of street improvements in the city of Mesa. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I try to pitch it. For $10 a year, you're getting $100 million worth of street improvements.
Since I wasn't here for the transportation bond and all of that, when we presented it to the public for a vote, we told them an estimate of $28.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what they were voting on, and they approved 28. So 10's great compared to 28, yes?
We think so.
Okay.
Yes, Frankie.
Curious question, when we send out the notices, I don't remember, do we explain why the increase, or do we go into this type of explanation or in a brief way within the document, or?
Yeah, the notices are fairly prescribed.
Yeah, so
by how we have to do it, so.
Mayor Giles, Councilmember Heredia, you're speaking about the notices coming out,
coming out. Resident, yeah.
Yeah. So the county is responsible for administering all the property tax in the county, and the city's tax rate represents about 10% of the homeowner's total bill. And so there's probably, I don't know, if you look at your bill, there's probably 20 different rates and levies on there, and they all go up or down a little bit. And so the county doesn't explain them at all. And so there's not going to be any sort of explanation going on.
That's why we try to do it here.
Here.
Yeah, and we can, if we can find ways to communicate that, we can maybe on social media or whatever. But council, we are just giving you the, there's a notice that has to be, is what we're doing first. The action of council to approve this happens in June? What was that date again? Sorry. June 21st. So we have some time between, now and the 21st when the council you'll take action, formal action to approve. Today we're just briefing you because we actually have to go put the notices out. And then we can start communicating that now, but the council action won't happen until the 21st of June. We'll come up with some way of trying to share that information. And I always like to talk about what you're getting for it first, and then it's, for $10 you're going to get all these projects. So we'll go back to the Mesa Moves program to talk about what's happening in that program, and remind our residents that they'll be paying, median home will be paying about $10 for that.
Thank you. Council, other questions on this presentation? It is a pretty common experience, I think, for all of us when we get our property tax bill from the county. There's sticker shock associated with that because it's, but as has been noted, people don't necessarily always appreciate what a small fraction of that goes to the city of Mesa. It's other governmental entities that, for the most part, are getting that money. And so I think that this is, we need to do the best job we can of communicating that this is good news, that as a result of really, I want to give kudos to city management, because the reason this isn't $28 and it's $10 is because of the actions of our staff. The refinancing, the improved bond ratings, these are all things that we have done proactively that has brought that down, that assessment down. So bad news is you pay property taxes. Good news is that I think there's a great story to tell about the way the city of Mesa has managed this. So thank you. This is agendized as providing direction, and I think just noting the timeline that you've given us and that this is going to go through the process over the next several months before it's implemented is, obviously we're comfortable with that and appreciate that. Okay, next agenda item is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the city's 2021 capital financing plan.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. I just want to start this, before we start this presentation, I want to recognize that we have a couple people that don't work for the city, but they help us a lot with our capital financing plan. Our bond counsel is Zach Sakis. He's in the ether out there on the phone. And then our financial advisor, Janelle Gold with Hilltop Securities, is also available to answer any questions that you may have. So we're going to talk about the financing plan for 2021. And you know, the need for doing this is really there's several needs, but really it's to support the infrastructure of the city, right? New development, updating aging infrastructure. It's to provide quality of life. We all want the facilities that we finance as part of this program. And it's an important part of the process. When you go through the budgeting process and through the capital improvement program process, the funding source for most of that program, it comes from financing. And it makes sense to finance capital projects. And this is equity. I probably should have put equitable, but it's equity in the sense of it being fair, because you want the people using the infrastructure to pay for it. And so if you finance something, those that use the infrastructure over the life of the assets are those that are paying for it. So it's fair to do it this way. The financing process for cities and towns, there's a little graphic down there below, but you can follow the money if you want. But basically, the city borrows money by selling bonds to investors. And then this, number one. And then number two, the city uses that money to pay for city projects, to build city infrastructure. And then thirdly, lastly, the city pays back the money it borrowed with interest for the life of the bonds back to the investors. That's called debt service, that principal and interest that the city pays back to investors. We typically issue debt with payments that extend to 20 to 25 years. The new debt service we issue is fit in or coordinated with existing debt to maintain stable payments from year to year. And the city's financial forecast includes not only debt service that we're issuing now, but it anticipates that we'll be issuing bonds, issuing debt every year going forward. That's in that 5-year, 6-year forecast. So the annual process for financing includes evaluating the needs in order to issue or sell new bonds, excuse me, to finance the active capital projects that have been approved during the budget process. Also, Councilmember Freeman, here's the number. Reduce interest costs by refunding or refinancing existing bonds at a lower interest rate over the same time frame. So in the last 5 years, we calculated we've saved, between utility bonds and general obligation bonds, we've saved $59 million. That's on a present value basis, meaning in today's dollars, over the past 5 years, which is significant. And we also, the third bullet, we use available cash to defease or pay off early existing debt. And you'll remember a couple years ago, Mayor Giles holding a big invoice, signing and circling, paying off those spring training bonds early, right? That's where we defeased that because we had that cash available.
Ryan, just to interrupt, do we have any more of that happening?
We ran out of farmland. So.
I was just hoping for another $55 million we could pay off.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all are.
Okay, thanks.
Well, let me just, I can answer Mayor Giles, Councilmember Freeman. We do typically each year, we're not doing it this year, but we're using impact fees or development fee revenue to defease utility debt early. That happens almost on an annual basis. We skipped it this year, but we've defeased, $10 to $20 million a year for quite a few years, which takes out that debt early.
So I just have one other, when you say this, the new debt service, when we take on new debt, is there a minimum amount of years that we can start pay off that debt? So say 7, 9 years, 11 years? How does that? Just for maybe for us as council to understand the requirements.
Mayor Giles, Councilmember Freeman, there's no minimum time period to pay off debt other than when we refinance bonds, we don't extend the time frame, we just keep it the same. So if we're, like today, we're talking about refinancing bonds that were issued, well, that have 10 years left or 14 years left, so we keep it at 10 years and 14. You can structure bonds. It's not like a mortgage where you just pay a straight dollar amount every year. you can structure it however you want. So you can pay off as much as you want in year 1 or as little as you want. Pay it off all in year 20. It's however you want to structure it. So it's really up to our financial planning process and how we determine that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so the last point there, each year we have debt principal that comes due from prior issuances that we're paying off. So we're not only issuing new debt, we're paying off old debt that has been issued in the past every year. And just wanted to give you an example of some of the general obligation bonds that are projects that are active right now, for which we're talking about selling these bonds. You can see, the Eastmark Fire Station, and that's First Avenue there in the middle, and the library, and some of the athletic fields. Utility projects, most of this is maintaining existing infrastructure right now with gas lines, electric substations, and water and wastewater lines. We wanted to talk a little bit, and let me just mention before I go on, both of the utility and the GEO projects, there are comprehensive lists that are attached to the agenda items if you'd like to see all the projects that are proposed to be funded with these bonds. Most of the projects that the city's working on now, most of the utility projects were part of the 2014 utility bond program. And we just wanted to walk through that program a little bit. It's been 7 years since this process happened. But early in the year, we came up with a list of projects. And then in the summer, the council, some of you, maybe remember, went through a process of determining what to do with that. In the fall, we published an information package that explained the projects and listed out what projects we were planning to do with that utility authorization, and then voters approved that $580 million bond question in November. And we've had some challenges, as you can imagine, from 7 years ago, having how things change. The project list that was put together then really, from the time the bond package was approved, the priorities had changed, and so there were some projects that really were more important to do or didn't need to be done on that list. So there was projects that were not completed because they weren't as high priority, which could cause some dissatisfaction with some folks that may have expected those projects. Also, it's somewhat difficult to adjust when you have all the bond authorization all committed everywhere, and then new priorities come up, like the downtown Mesa revitalization, or Southeast Mesa growth, or that water line project to the Gila River Indian community. So, in order to work on new projects, you have to push something out of the queue, and so it creates it makes it more difficult. And some authorizations that were approved, each utility has its own authorization, and some of those are spent faster than others. So, for example, this issuance, we're talking about issuing the final piece of the electric authorization, so there won't, that'll be the last of it from 2014, but the other authorizations all have a couple years left worth of authorization. And so that creates some issues. And then streets, you might wonder why streets is an example. Well, the streets are just conduits for utilities, and so if you don't have streets authorization or you don't have utility authorization, they can restrict one another. And then the last point there, utility infrastructure, it has to be maintained no matter what, right? You can't not maintain the water system or the wastewater system. You have to provide the utilities, you have to maintain them and meet the needs of the residents and businesses. So we took a look around at what other cities are doing to finance their utility infrastructure, and it's frankly kind of interesting to realize this. But you can see that there's 5 different major kind of types of utility financing that we found, and you notice Mesa is alone in the first column there. But if you look at the first 3 columns, those are all bonds, and you look at the last 2 columns, those are referred to as obligations, and you can see that the majority, interestingly, of cities in in Arizona, major cities have gone to these utility revenue obligations, which we're going to talk about a little bit here, but there are obligations that are specifically backed by utility revenue. So we wanted to look at that process. The city of Mesa has issued obligations as opposed to bonds in the past. When you call them, let me just go back for a second. When you call them utility revenue obligations, it means it's just obligations backed by utility revenue, or the column next to it, excise tax obligations, it just means it's obligations backed by excise tax. So the city of Mesa has issued excise tax obligations several times in the past for State Route 24, spring training, the A's and the Cubs stadiums, and then the ASU at City Center last year. So this is something we've done before with just backing it with excise tax or sales tax revenue. So the recommendation is going to be to do this, to try this as other cities are with utility financing.
Excuse me,
so,
Ryan.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor has a question.
Please.
So on your chart, excise tax obligations for Mesa isn't checked, but we have used that for these projects that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah, Mayor, Vice Mayor, that's a good question. Thanks. I keep thinking that too, but this is just for utility financing.
We've never done it for utilities.
Yeah.
We've
I
done
see.
it outside
So we're
of
only
utility.
talking about utilities
Yeah, right.
and not necessarily
But because
these
we've done it,
projects that we are spelling out here is just noted. Okay.
yeah, we've done it for non-utility projects. Now we're suggesting this may be a time and opportunity to look at that as an option for some of these new projects that are in front of us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it can be a little confusing because some cities use excise tax to back their utilities, and it's interesting.
Yes, Mr.
Hey,
Freeman.
Ryan and Mike, just looking at the bond, categories, most of the other cities aren't even using bonding.
Not for their utilities. They would do it.
GO.
Yeah, they would use, so remember, that chart is only talking about utilities. On the other side, when you talk about streets, parks, fire stations, almost everybody will be similar in doing the GO bonds. Okay? Although they both do both, like we do both GO bonds and we do excise tax. Right? So when we come to non-utility projects, we've had a history of using GO bonds and obligations. On the utility side, to date, we've only done the bonds. Now we're seeing, what we'd like to see is an opportunity, just because of, as Ryan was kind of teeing this up, we've had so many new different projects that were not in the original bond program, and take a small portion of what we're proposing to issue and do those as obligations. So it's not much different than what we do on the non-utility projects. We're proposing to do that on the utility side.
One question while we stop. Out of the $580 million that we did a utility bond in 2014, how much of that bond approval is still outstanding? Is not used?
Is it, you said?
Oh, yeah. Mayor, Vice Mayor, let me go to, I have a slide in the back I'm just going to run through here. It's going to show
I can
that-
wait. I can wait.
Okay, that's a good idea. Let's wait. Otherwise, everyone's going to get dizzy watching me scroll through here. Yeah, and it's actually after the end of the presentation, so remind me at the end and we'll go look at it. It's going to be.
Did you have another question? Good, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Jump ahead, Jen, it's slide 20.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the recommendation is to, as Chris mentioned, to try out this utility revenue obligation process. The projects and the debt issuances would still come to council every year for consideration, just like they do now. There'd be no impact to the amount of debt issued for the obligations versus the bonds. They're still backed and paid for by utility revenue. So it'd be very similar to what we're doing now. The utility revenue obligations, the advantages of them, really the big word we keep coming back to is flexibility, right? They provide the flexibility to do this on an annual basis instead of having this huge process where ramp up these massive bond programs, you know, and then have to figure it out for 7 years later how we're juggling it all. Transparency, the project decisions are made and communicated each year. So what we're saying we're going to do is clear each year, and then the accountability. We're able to actually do the projects that we say we're going to do when we talk about it each year. So the recommendation is we issue small amounts of obligations in 2021. We try it out and we evaluate how it goes, and then we keep issuing the remaining authorization to issue bonds. It's after this year it'll be about 90 million that's remaining. We'll look at that. And Chris mentioned some of the new projects. There's a lot of stuff that's happened since 2014. Here's some examples. You can see electric. There's a lot of downtown improvements that weren't part of the original 2014 authorization. Natural gas, water. There's the reuse pipeline going out to the Gila River Indian community, and then the expansion of the plants and the wastewater. Same thing. There's some new projects there that weren't around in 14 or envisioned in 14. Now we're gonna move on to the cost savings
right,
part.
and Ryan, kind of quickly just emphasize, you said this, but I just want to emphasize to council, we're doing both, right? So we're going to do both. What as Councilmember Duff was saying was we have still revenue bonds. We're still going to fund projects that were in that original 2014 program. We're going to do that. But because we see so many of these new projects coming that some of them were in our long-term CIP, they just weren't in that part of it. But obviously you can see the dynamics of what's happening with growth. So instead of bumping projects out of the programs we said we were going to do back in 14, what we'd like to do is bring these in without affecting that authorization. And so these are projects, we try to identify projects that said, listen, these are projects that we just, there's an urgency to getting them done now that we didn't see 7 years ago. It doesn't affect the total amount of debt service. The council still gets to look at debt service and the impact on rates. We do that in the fallish time frame. So we'll have that discussion. We like it because it allows us to bring to you the projects, just like we're doing today. You will always see the list of projects that we are proposing to issue debt for. You'll see, as Brian said, in the back, there's a list by detail. You have that, and then the council, even after you authorize the debt, we still have to bring those two on the agenda to approve the contract or the design and then the contract. So there's a tremendous amount of, nothing changes as far as that's concerned. We just need the flexibility right now to get projects moving that were not included back in 2014. So that's where we're at.
Mr. Luna.
Mr. Brady, thank you for saying that. I think that these projects are going to be happening, but they still require our approval as they move forward. And Mike, you and I spoke about that yesterday. So what is that process? How does that happen?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Luna. Today we're preparing you for the Monday agenda. On Monday, the council will see 5 resolutions. 3 of them will be new money, and 2 of them will be the refunding issuances that Ryan will be discussing right now. So every year we'll continue that same process where, regardless, we'll come to council for the bond resolution to consider.
And regardless of whether it's bond or obligations, that doesn't change this process. And really the part of the discussion and the public disclosure is identical and parallel. So we hope that we see this as really an opportunity to be more, when we do these big long-term plans, they change. Here, each year we can come to council and say, okay, this is what we're actually going to do. We will provide you will also adopt a CIP. You'll adopt a 5-year long-term CIP, but we always say it's a plan, and plans change, but we always want to make sure we have the opportunity to discuss the actual projects that Beth is going to go build in the next year, but she needs to know there's a funding source before she signs those contracts. So that's what we do at this time each year, and that's what we're proposing with the obligations.
Vice Mayor.
I do like the tool of using obligations because it allows us to respond to our immediate needs according to our growth. In 2014, we still hadn't even come out of the recession. It took like 10 years. So it was like 17, 18. And now we're seeing growth that I don't think you could have ever projected. And for us to wait until, you know, the next bond election to respond, and then it takes the time to sell that, and then plan it and everything, you know, we're talking 5 years out before we can respond to our needs at least. So I do like the flexibility of the obligation. Thank you.
Question.
Yes, Mr. Reddy.
What the usage of these, is there a scenario where it overlaps with the bond to the obligation, or are these projects totally separate?
From the types of projects that it funds and how it flows through the payment, there's no difference. There's no difference in how they fit in to our debt service payments. None of that. It's identical there. It's there's some technical things about what changes about how it gets authorized, but from the council's perspective, you're again, just like Mike was saying, on the agenda, you're going to see, you know, all the resolutions for all of them are going to be listed there, so that doesn't change. The council, the public, what they see, the listing of the projects, the identification of the projects, still the same, presented to the council. We have public hearings on the capital improvement program, so community members can weigh in on those. And it's usually, hey, we need more of this and sooner is usually what happens. And certainly with the Central Pipeline, it's a return. We have to look at the ROI because we need to get that. That's one of those projects I think the council's now said, yeah, we need to get that done as soon as possible. Now that we're hearing about the Colorado water, you know, challenges, you know, that is getting that pipeline built as soon as possible gives us another source of water. It's high priority and low cost. So those, yet that wasn't in the program back in 2014. And now we're like here today going, yeah, we need to go as quickly as possible. The Gila Rivers are ready, wanting to work with us on this. So it's that kind of flexibility that we think is very important, especially in a utility. I mean, all of these projects, regardless of how we come up with the list of projects and how we authorize the debt, they have to be done. You know, this is not, it's not kind of a choice here. Maybe there's more choices about parks and other things like that, but utilities are essential. And the sensitivity that we always have to manage, right, is the need and the demand for those utilities balanced with the cost and the impact it hits on rates. So that, and that exercise doesn't change in any of this.
As far as maybe, as far as projects, in the 2014 bond projects, would you use excise or the obligation piece rather than the bond?
I think for now, the plan is we have, and I think you'll see the number, about 2 years left of bonds. Mm-hmm. And so we can keep using those. And I think we know that we've given you the list of projects for obligations that were not in that 2014 list. So we would see that we'd probably do both of those for the next couple of years at least. Okay. And then we can have a discussion later about which path we're not saying right now we're going to think completely different. We're just saying we need this other tool to move forward on these projects that have come up that were not included in 2014.
Okay. And Mayor, I brought up the slide at the end of the presentation there with the utilities revenue bonds, the remaining authorization. And you can see that this year we're planning to sell 35 million. Right now, before the sale, there's about 130 million remaining after the sale. So that, yeah, middle column shows that 129.6, and then at the last column on the right shows 94.3 left. And most notably, you can see electric is at 0, where the others are all around 30 million left.
So we may need to come to council if we have a big need in electric, which we could, especially in the downtown area. We may have to come back at a future time and seek an obligation bond until we, you know, at least to meet those needs right now.
And if I could just add, to to Councilmember Heredia's question. When you look at the list of projects that's attached to the agenda item, you'll see that on one of the columns we've put whether they're funded with bonds, whether they're funded with obligations, or whether they're funded with bonds and obligations. So you'll see there's some projects where the design was done with bonds, but we're proposing to do the construction with obligations because there's not enough bond capacity, right? So projects can be, there's no limits to how we use them really. It's just managing them. So you'll see that, how they're kind of split funded on that list.
Why don't you go to slide 15?
Which one?
15.
Okay. So we want to talk, let's make that big. We want to talk about the refunding opportunities, the refinancing opportunities. So we're proposing to refinance or refund bonds that were issued 10 years ago in 2011, a series of general obligation bonds, which would save us $3 million on a present value basis, and utility bonds, really large issuance, which would save us $18 million of interest on a present value basis. The nominal amount is more, but that's the present value amount. So $21 million in total just from this year's 2 refundings. And that's really just based on those factors we talked about before. Very low interest rates right now, very good credit rating right now. And so $21 million in 1 year is fantastic.
I think that's the number Mr. Freeman was looking for earlier.
There you go.
Yeah.
We'll take you all the way.
Okay, so the proposed issuance in 2021 issuances that Mike mentioned, there's 5 of them you'll see on the agenda, 5 different resolutions. Under the library parks, public safety streets, there's the new GO bonds and the refunding GO bonds, and then under the utilities, there's the new utility bonds and the refunding utility bonds, and then at the bottom there you see the new utility obligations that we've been talking about. So the timeline for these transactions, you'll see on Monday, you'll see those 5 resolutions. And then in May, we'll actually go out and offer the bonds on the market and get the prices and lock those in. And then on late May, mid-June timeframe, we'll receive the proceeds and we'll close the transactions. Thank you, Mayor. That's our presentation.
Thank you again. This is agendized as providing direction, and I think the direction we'd be providing is to proceed with the timeline that you've indicated.
And really the agenda item is really related to the items that are on your agenda too.
On the Monday's agenda.
On the Monday, yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Spilsbury.
Yeah, I think this obviously makes sense. It's a great idea. It's with everything going on in our city and the growth and all of that and what other cities are doing and what they have done. I want to thank you, Mike, because even though you let Ryan have the spotlight today, you met with me yesterday and gave me great insights and helped me understand all of this complicated issue. So great job today, Ryan, on these presentations. And it makes a lot more sense to me now, and so I appreciate these presentations, and I think it's a great idea to move forward with this.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Thompson, you good? Okay. Thank you. Next agenda item is to hear a presentation and discuss the fiscal year 2022 through 2026 capital improvement program with a focus on utilities.
Yeah, so now we'll kind of go into some specifics about those projects that are in the utilities. So,
morning, Mayor, Council. Brian Ritchell with the Office of Management and Budget. Alongside me, I've got Justin Stant, who is the coordinator in the Office of Management and Budget. He oversees the capital projects and life cycles. So, as City Manager Brady just indicated, this is kind of an overview of what's in the capital improvement program, but also more specific of the utilities. A couple weeks ago, I did a presentation, overview of the whole program and kind of the dollar amounts in that, but then also focused in on the non-utilities. This one will focus on the utilities. So the agenda is basically to talk about the utility program, but then also review active projects and then kind of what the next steps are. So as you just got an in-depth presentation from our city treasurer of the utility funding finances, I won't spend too much time on it. These projects are financed by the local revenues of the utilities, then utility bonds and obligations. And along with that, what we focus in on too on the capital improvement program is the operations and maintenance. We look at that throughout the life cycle of the CIP project, but then also what we do, we include in the forecast is the operations and maintenance. And when those projects are done, then we input the operations and maintenance throughout the forecast for that. So the forecast of the general governmental fund and also the utility funds, we put those in after the project is done, but we put them in ahead of time. We work with the departments on what that operations and maintenance may be, and then plug those into the forecast. And some examples are plant maintenance costs for expansion of the wastewater facility, chemical costs, and then also any additional staff for any plants or facilities. So the one major project that that the city finished up this year is the Greenfield water reclamation plant, and it's been a couple of years of that expansion. The total cost was $210 million of that expansion. The city of Mesa's share was $127 million. It was a big expansion that helped us out down at the Greenfield water reclamation plant. That was the big one. Now, kind of what Ryan was focusing on too, some of the proposed utility projects for this coming up fiscal year that are in the budget. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but for the water, we have what was discussed, the Central Mesa reuse pipeline. That is the water line that will go down to the GRIC. That will definitely, with the return on investment for the city. Also is East Mesa Water interconnect pipes, the Signal Butte expansion for the treatment plant. Then also on the wastewater side, we have some major plant improvements for the Northwest Water Reclamation Plant, but then also some sewer line replacements. On the natural gas side, we have the Queen Creek Gate Station, some residential and commercial developments that we have going on, but then also the Southern Avenue to Country Club improvements. And then on the electric side is substation improvements and some new utility or new electric service and some undergrounding of current. Mayor, I think Councilmember Thompson has a question he raised.
Oh, I apologize. Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
I do, thank you. On the natural gas, and I briefly discussed this with Mr. Hirschberg a few weeks ago. But on the natural gas side, we should probably start looking at with the deep freeze that took place in Texas. We don't really have a backup, a redundancy for our natural gas system. Should we start looking at trying to negotiate a pipeline with Transwestern so that we're not reliant just on the Permian Basin, gas coming out of the Permian Basin, but we're also starting to look at the San Juan Basin and the panhandle of Texas to kind of backfeed our system in the event that Texas does shut down. I mean, I remember in my past life, there was a cold spell across the Southwest in Texas all the way to California, and it impacted the natural gas pipelines all the way from El Paso or from the Permian Basin all the way to LA and Victorville, Barstow area. And so just thinking if it happens every 10 to 15 years, should we start looking at a redundancy to our natural gas system?
Good morning, Mayor and Council again. Frank McRae. Councilmember Thompson, we do get some of our gas supply from the San Juan Basin in addition to our Permian Basin, but we do not have transportation rights yet on Transwestern. So that's something that we're looking into. We're also looking into how our gas supplier didn't access San Juan and transport on Transwestern as much as they possibly could have during that February timeframe. So we're looking at ways for us to take the lead on that take the initiative on that and do that type of work ourselves. The other thing is a couple council meetings ago, we approved a contract for mobile gas supplies. So although that wouldn't be quite the magnitude that would allow us to serve our entire system in the event we lost a major part of our supply, but it would allow us to possibly avoid some of those costs. It's not an inexpensive source of supply, but in an emergency, it could also help us avoid some of those issues that we could have faced if February had gotten worse than it did.
Right. Okay. That's good. Thank you, Frank.
Vice Mayor.
I know it's preliminary, but do we have any anticipation about the American Rescue Plan and infrastructure dollars flowing to municipalities and how that would impact our city, or is that too early to even?
Yeah, Vice Mayor, I think that is something we're waiting to get more information on. You'll see a presentation on Monday. We're also waiting for on transit, opportunities for those same dollars for. So yeah, there could be some opportunity, especially on infrastructure. I've seen it mention a lot of water, wastewater things. So yeah, we're anxious to kind of see what comes down. We've tried to encourage the engineering staff and these departments that are heavy on CIPs to maybe accelerate some of our design work from projects that are further out into the future, so they can become shovel ready. That's in the past that's become kind of a standard that would allow for funding for projects that are in that position. So we are working to try to move now and not wait and get some of those projects, at least get some of that design work done, so that maybe if that's a criteria, that allows us to move quickly. But I think we're still waiting to get that information.
Great. And one more question. I think municipalities will begin to look at broadband or fiber as part of the utility system. Do we have any projections on that? Again, there might be some American Rescue dollars that allow us to delve into that, or at this point, do we have any projection of how we will address?
We have a consultant that we've engaged for the last months, I guess, Scott, would just to be fair. And they have, yes, they've given us some preliminary ideas to what it would take to run fiber to every home. And that's a tremendously large number. And so we're looking at, okay, breaking that down into maybe specific neighborhoods and that have the greatest need for that. So we should have a report fairly quickly as we evolve and getting that information and hoping that either, is that something the city does? We've actually had several, we've had a few entities that would like to work with the city on possibly a partnership of extending broadband throughout our community. So we're kind of it's a new field for us, and so we're, we have Ian and Travis that are working with our consultants and working with these different groups that are approaching us about opportunities. So I would imagine kind of after we get through the budget, we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. And to your point, Councilmember Duff, the idea about, are there federal funding opportunities that would allow us to extend that, especially in our neighborhoods that are underserved and those areas. I think that's the opportunity we're really looking for. So yeah, I think more to come on that.
Great, thank you.
So Mayor and Council, this is kind of the projects I just went over are the major projects. There's still a list of many other projects that the utilities will be doing. These are just the major projects that we will be breaking ground or starting in fiscal year 21-22, and that go on through the program, the 5-year program. And so at the next steps, what we will do is on May 1st, there will be a public notice for the proposed CIP, and then also on May 17th, council will hold a public hearing and the consideration of the capital improvement program. And then on June 21st, as part of the CIP program, the secondary property tax levy adoption on June 21st.
A large planning document that we use, so you can kind of see what the future looks like, the types of projects that are coming, significant cost. Ultimately, each year we have to go and decide what can we actually manage within the rates and the impact on our residential and commercial users. So every year we'll come back and have that discussion. The CIP is really it's kind of, think about it as the kind of a short-term general plan of the CIP. It's a planning document, but it informs us about, when's the next time we're going to need to expand a large major plant, right? Where we're going to have to come up with, hundreds of millions of dollars. Where are we keeping up with replacing water and sewer lines, especially water lines in our older neighborhoods? So it tries to get into all of that. So that's what the purpose of that CIP is. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we are making progress on our agenda. We appreciate it. The next item, we have 3 departments to hear from on their budget presentations. Council, are you okay with pressing forward? And okay, with item 2D, let's begin with environmental management and sustainability.
So, Mayor, we're going to kick this off because this is the utility fund. And so there's a dynamic that all these departments kind of get integrated together, and they manage their own operations separately, but everything ultimately flows together in the shared resources that come in. And so Brian's just going to give a quick overview, and then each of the directors will come up and present for their department.
So good morning again, Mayor and Council. As City Manager just indicated, the utility departments, this is the utility department's budget overview for fiscal year 21-22. And to give you, as the City Manager just indicated, what the city does is looks at the whole utility fund as one. Even though we have separate utilities, we still look at the utility fund as a whole. And what I wanted to show you here is the highlighted column is the numbers that we will be talking about and looking at, and that's the fiscal year 21-22 budget, and that is the amount that council will consider in adopting from the proposed city manager's budget. So what I wanted to show you is the middle line, the total net sources and uses at negative 19.7 million. That includes some of the new debt service that the city treasurer, Ryan, is going to look to issue. That includes those debt service payments. But then also on the years out, this is where we try to look and see, okay, how are the individual, or how's the fund doing on the net sources and uses, and how that is going to impact the rate discussions in the fall. So with that, we still try to, as I mentioned before, in the utilities, we try to keep, one of our principles is 15 to 20% fund balance reserve. So at the end of the fiscal year for the budget for 21-22, we are still at a healthy fund balance of 25.6. However, in the outer years, we're starting to draw down some of that reserve. And so I highlighted it orange just so it's kind of a caution of the outer years are dipping below or into that 15 to 20%. And so it's just a caution, but we still have time to kind of react to it and kind of plan for it and see what we need to do to make those either fluctuate either up or down on how we go. And so with that.
And Mayor, just quickly, even though that net sources and uses is a significant drawdown, we're watching that. The balance is, we've kind of made a conscious decision with a 30% fund balance, our goal of being 15 to 20. We felt like there was a little opportunity to allow that to draw down just a little bit. And that allows us to fund the operations and the debt service and the utility fund without having to put significant impact on additional rate increases. And that what we're hoping is by the minimal rate increases that we're proposing just a little bit each year, that will begin to make the adjustment and equalize more with our expenditures. And as you can see in the out years, we begin to minimize that drawdown. Now, we have to be careful. We're going to watch this. Some of us are optimistic that we've built in growth in here, but we're thinking that maybe with some of these large users and what we're seeing, that will help also minimize in the future some of that reduction. The other way to make up those net sources and uses is to either reduce expenses or have to increase revenues. We're hoping the increasing revenues comes from just growth and demand. Of course, then you have to balance out, do you have enough resources to meet? So we're juggling all this, but we want to at least show you the long-term perspective of what we're seeing, and we think we can manage that in the out years as we get to that, because certainly we have at least 2-3 years to be looking and making those adjustments. We're still almost at 20% even 3 years out. And so each year we'll look out 3-5 years, and if we need to make little adjustments, then we can do that.
This is very interesting, fascinating news, but I mean, it does seem a little anti-intuitive to me because there's such a demand for our utilities right now. Particularly when you look in the southeast part of Mesa, we literally have Fortune 50 companies that are saying, we will buy all the water and wastewater that you will sell us. And so explain how is it that we are drawing down our revenue?
We know that those groups have indicated that's their demand. Very few of them have actually turned on the spigot and are getting billed right now. And they're probably 2 to 3 years out before they'll actually be up and running. And so we haven't seen that in here. And so yes, we agree. And that's why I say every year we need to make this adjustment, because those announcements have been made.
Right.
But those, that actual billing and seeing the actual consumption, we haven't realized that yet.
So I get my take is that this is a fairly conservative estimate.
Absolutely.
Right? And it doesn't.
That was my point.
We'll believe it when we see it.
Every year, that's why every year we want to come back and look out 3-5 years, and we'll have, as we get those come online and we see what the actual demand is, and we can make those adjustments.
Yes, Mr. Heredia.
For context, what's been the previous year's ending fund percent?
So prior to, last year's actual, what was last year's actual?
Yeah.
It was over 30%, right?
It was 33.7%.
Okay.
Yeah. So
these are dynamic every year, right? Because since I've been on, they show a drawdown, but it seems like it's never drawn down to that.
As the mayor says, we're very conservative, and then we allow for ourselves to adjust each year.
Yeah.
But it's always the better, because if we see something significant out there, if it were below 10%, we know that even being conservative, we might not be able to make that up. When we see it within a couple percentages, we feel pretty good about where we're at.
Yeah.
And Mr. Brady, we want to maintain a higher percentage in terms of what's available for our bond ratings as well, right?
Yes, well, and we just went through all of that the last 3 weeks. And I actually had to leave one meeting that had already gone over an hour, and they were still getting drilled by the analyst after I left. So these are the very questions they look at, right? And they ask about capacity to serve the demand. They want to know about ratios, about revenues and assets. And so there's all kinds of these questions that go through the conversation, but reserves are a big part of that conversation. And so they're always looking for the city's commitment to maintaining fund balances and revenues. And I think it's helped us to try to smooth out and show, at least in the forecast, modest revenue increases out into the future. That shows a commitment to getting those done. So, and remember also, just to council, just bring it up, this also includes, now going forward, beginning this year, I believe, is the first time we've seen the impact of the ordinance.
Yes, in fiscal year 2021.
The council approved the ordinance related to the general fund transfer. That is now, you're seeing the full impact or whatever reflection of that here, which, by the way, rating agency analysts, one of them said, that's what we're looking for. We hit the button with them, and they were very happy to know that we had that the council had actually taken action as an ordinance and put it in place and articulated how we were going to move forward. So that was, we hope we get some bonus points on that one. So
great. So I guess my point is that if a pessimist would look at this and say, wow, you're in trouble with your utilities because every year you're losing tremendous amounts of money, you're spending down your reserves. And I just want to point out, I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. Our utility business is actually, we're quite optimistic, and this is our cash cow that allows us to not have a primary property tax.
It certainly, the general fund is part of that three-legged stool. The transfer is because we don't have the primary. The caution I would give Mayor and Council is with the big demand that we're getting from the big users is creating big demand on our infrastructure. And as we're putting modest amounts in now, and there will be an upward pressure in the future for us to take on probably more infrastructure. And so, we're trying to be very careful about the timing of how much the projects come, because with that comes debt service. So it's the balance. But Mayor, you're right. If these big users come on, that will certainly, we'll be able to show that in the coming years and make those adjustments. And again, I would also say if we could show you going back a little bit further as far as the reserves that we've actually ended up with, we've been above 25 and 30% probably for the last 3 years. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep.
So we're doing well. At the end of the day, we're always right at or above where we need to be.
Yeah, Mr. Brady, that's a good point. And I really think that's part of the story. And I think that's something that we need to convey to the public, that these are anticipated, what we're projecting, but let's look at last year's and look at how we ended.
Right.
So.
Well, and there's been times where that number's been less than 10%.
Yeah.
And we still were brave enough to move forward to the next day and make it work. So, and every year we'll bring this to you and have that discussion.
Okay, we were doing really well on our time, and
Sorry.
I think I got all
So with that, I'll ask Scott Boucher to come up and talk about environmental management and sustainability.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Scott Boucher, I'm the Director of Environmental Management and Sustainability. Here to give you our budget update today. We've gone over a lot of the, wrong way. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, we've gone over a lot of the financial numbers today, so we're going to discuss a little bit more the successes and challenges associated with the department over the last year and what we see coming up. First with the successes, the Flare to Fuel project. So that's the first phase of what we have dubbed our food to energy project is at 60% design right now. So we're getting final comments on that 60% design. And we anticipate we will be back to council sometime probably after the break to ask for approval to order some of the long lead items associated with that project. Just to remind folks, that's a project that's going to take existing biogas that's generated at the Northwest Water Reclamation Plant, treat it to natural gas pipeline quality standards, put it into our natural gas utility, and then show its usage in our solid waste vehicles, which are powered by natural gas. And then we anticipate sometime probably at the end of the year, we'll be back with a GMP to council for approval and then begin construction in the beginning of next year. And construction will take approximately 1 year. So we're looking at sometime the beginning of 2023 that system will come online. We've also had some success. We started a Recycle Right Wizard. It was a project that was led by the city of Mesa that is an app for your phone that actually most of the other cities in the valley have also joined in on this. So if you have that app on your phone, you're able to see what is recyclable based on what city that you're in. You can ask that questions to the app and it'll tell you whether or not it's supposed to go into the blue barrel, or we'll give you other options too, such as our household hazardous materials facility, and let you know, no, that material should not go into the blue barrel. That's something that you should bring to the household hazardous materials facility. That facility, even though we were closed for a small portion of the year last year with COVID, has still been very successful. We get rave reviews from our residents as far as the service there. And one of the great things, I've been in front of you guys a lot lately, and we've been discussing about using less. That's one of the things with the household hazardous materials facility. We have almost 40% of the material that comes into that facility actually gets reused through the swap shop. That's been one of the most successful parts of this facility is, you know, folks being able to come in and instead of having to buy new material at the store and spend money and the energy that goes into new materials, they're able to get those same types of materials for free at the household hazardous materials facility. So that's been very successful.
Underline what you just said, that the Household Hazardous Materials Center was closed for a while because of COVID, but it's up and running again now. So so people need to know that they can, and what are the hours of that facility?
So it is open Wednesday through Saturday from 7 a.m. till noon.
Thank you.
Okay. Digital documents, so again, a little bit of part of COVID with folks not being able to come into our buildings. We were able to pivot and convert a lot of our service agreements that we have with solid waste customers, whether there are commercial customers that have front load business or our roll-off customers, which can be businesses or residents. We switched to digital documents, and that has been very successful. At this point, we have over 50% of our commercial customers are on long-term service agreements, and we have found that when we're able to send this digitally and the business is able to review the document and sign it without having to come into the office, that we get a greater response from them, and it is a lot quicker response. So it has helped save time for staff, and it also has helped us secure more business long term. So that's been very successful. I'd also like to say that the continuity of services during COVID. So immediately when stay-at-home orders were put in place, we saw dramatic increases in the amount of residential solid waste that we were picking up. Over the year, it's been almost a 10% increase in the amount of solid waste that we have picked up. Typically, we see anywhere, around a 2, maybe a 3% increase in that solid waste. And then we haven't seen a decrease. Typically in the summertime, we'll see a pretty significant decrease as people start to go on vacation and go other places. We'll see a decrease in the amount of solid waste that we collect. And we did not have any dip in the summer this last year. So being able to continue those services seamlessly for our residents, I just would like to take a moment and really thank the operations staff. I've been so impressed and so proud to work with them. There's been a lot of work that they have done on the back end to make sure that that was done and that our residents didn't have an interruption of service. So I just want to take a moment to thank all of those operations staff. And then mutual aid agreement is we just completed an extension of that mutual aid agreement. That's for solid waste infrastructure with other cities. So this started actually, if you recall, when we had a flood, the city of Mesa, the city of Scottsdale was one of the ones that stepped up. They provided some roll-off trucks and roll-off boxes for the city of Mesa as we were doing the cleanup. That was kind of a difficult process. You get into insurance requirements and have to involve some of the attorneys in how we share that equipment. So what we did, actually, Patrick Murphy in the Solid Waste Division took the lead and put together a mutual aid agreement so that all of those insurance and legal questions were answered ahead of time, because emergencies tend to happen in the middle of the night. They don't happen at noon on a Tuesday. So we've had these mutual aid agreements. It's almost every single city in the Valley has signed on to this so that we can exchange solid waste infrastructure. And actually this year, City of Scottsdale had a fire that they needed some trucks, and we were pretty seamlessly able to provide and return that favor back to the city of Scottsdale by providing them some of our vehicles that we had so that they could continue service after they had a pretty large fire at one of their facilities. And so it's been a great benefit for all of the cities and very successful. Oh, I keep going the wrong way. I apologize. All right, other successes, the Climate Action Plan. We did just present to SAT last week. So this time last week, we were sitting here talking about the Climate Action Plan. SAT did provide direction to move forward to the full council with the 4 aspirational goals that we had discussed previously at council, as far as carbon neutrality by 2050, 100% renewable energy by 2050, a 90% waste reduction by 2050. And then the 4th aspirational goal is to complete a community-wide plan over the next year. So this first Climate Action Plan will focus on city operations, and then over the next year, we'll be also reaching out to the community and looking at a community-wide plan next year. Reduced energy use in city buildings. Yes, we're hoping to come before the break this year, sometime hopefully late June, July. Yeah. Reduced energy use in city buildings and all sites. So this is the 2nd year when we've seen reduction in the overall, so all of the sites, not just buildings, but if you look at water pump stations and wastewater treatment plants and those sorts of things, that we've seen reduction in the energy use, which I think is very impressive, especially when we talk about the growth that we have seen within the city. So that's been very good. Also, SRP and their renewable energy offer. So that was a large utility scale project that we partnered with SRP on. That came online the beginning of January this year. January 1st, that came online and was able to significantly increase our renewable energy portfolio. And then water conservation, we do a lot of work. So when we talk about the reduced energy use in buildings, there's a lot of work that we do with our facilities folks and also the parks folks. So working a lot also on the water conservation side, where we've been able to identify leaks quickly with our staff working together and monitoring the usage both of electricity and water, and we've been able to fix those quickly so that we make sure that we're efficiently using the water that we have. We've talked about what a precious commodities these are, so You know, we need to make sure that we use them as efficiently as we possibly can. And then one of the last things that COVID had brought on was online environmental training. This is something we had talked about previously. It's both with our stormwater permit, some asbestos programs that we have where we used to have face-to-face training with employees. We've been able to convert that online, and the departments have really taken to that and would like to continue that going forward because it's just more efficient for them. So challenges, one of the things we were discussing recycling and infrastructure. So with the city, so let me start with there was a fire, if you recall, with the recycling plant at the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. Was owned by Republic Services. It was almost 2 years ago now that we're going on since that fire. Republic Services still has not begun construction on a new facility at that location. We do still have a contract in place that we would be able to bring them 20,000 tons of recyclable material if they do build that facility, but they have yet to actually begin construction on that. So we have been working with our engineering folks on from direction from council on what we might be able to do as a city ourselves. Right now we have begun a project in which we are looking at a master plan at the East Mesa Service Center. So we had previously discussed that we could possibly put a transfer station at the East Mesa Service Center. So the next step is as we start looking at where that would be located within East Mesa is what effect is that going to have on the other departments that are located at the service center? Because there's kind of a domino effect that would come with this, because this is going to be a large operation that would be placed there. So we're working with engineering on that master plan and what effect that would have of putting that transfer station there. And then in addition to that, we're still continuing to look at the possibility of building a recycling center at Pecos in Sossaman down in the Southeast Valley. And we're working with engineering. We're getting a consultant on board to really look in depth of the financials associated with that and how that site would also, how that facility would fit within that site. So we're getting into a lot more detail associated with how this project would work. And then overall looking at how those two facilities would work with each other and what that does with the finances of the operation as far as the operational cost or operational savings that we may see from having these facilities that are built. Staffing, we are currently hiring. We've talked about, you guys have hit on, council has hit on a lot of this stuff this morning with the growth that we have seen in Southeast Mesa, and especially with then the increased tonnage that we're seeing from collections. We are hiring currently. I think we have 8 new operators that we're hiring right now. 4 of those are new positions that have been added, and we'll continue to watch those positions and whether or not we need to add new positions. One of the things that we saw that I did not anticipate is we've actually had growth in our commercial business over the last year also. Commercial and roll-off have continued to grow. I thought that we would probably see a decrease in those operations, but I think it's a combination of the great service that we provide and that the economy has been doing well, that we've actually seen growth in the commercial side in addition to the residential side of the business. So we'll continue to monitor that and see what we need to do as far as adding vehicles and operators to make sure that we're able to service all of our customers. Public outreach is going to be a very large part of our operation over the next couple of years between recycling, water conservation, and the climate action plan. We anticipate reaching out to the community a lot on these 3 issues and trying to explain to them how they can help the city, both with recycling and as far as putting the right materials into the blue barrel, or how to reduce the amount of material that they're producing. We're really trying to have that discussion of think about it before you bring it into your home and not just as you're giving it to the city. And then also the same with water conservation and our climate action plan. What can residents do themselves to help make a difference with climate? At Dobson Ranch,
I'm sorry, Scott, before you go on to that, those are the 3 huge issues that I think we're all, I know this council is very passionate about: the recycling, climate action plan, water conservation. The public outreach, are we going to do another big program where we, as we've done in the past, or I need to know more about what the public outreach plan is for those 3 items. Is that something in your department, or is that going to be citywide?
So it is citywide. We work a lot with the public information group. We work a lot with the city manager's office. But then I have folks that are, their jobs both for water conservation and recycling are interacting with the community, both our residents and our businesses, on how they can conserve or can recycle correctly. So.
Staff on the communication side. So they coordinate with public information, but he has, employees been around for a long time that do a very good job in this area. But Mayor, are you looking for more of a larger citywide campaign, or what's your?
Well, I'm just really pleased to hear that we're doing this. I think it's critically important, and so I just am anxious to know more about it so that the council can be a big part through our social media, through the citywide communications, Channel 11. Yeah. I mean, I think with this. Well,
on the climate action plan, we need to come back to the full council and give the briefing we gave to SAD. So once we have that in place, then that'll give us the opportunity to go do that. I think recycling is always it's more of an ongoing conversation. I don't know that there's always been I think if we have a new initiative or something like that would work, right?
Well, for example, on the recycling, I think when we just got through talking about our CIP program for utility infrastructure, and we're getting on the horns of the dilemma, making a decision: do we invest a lot of money in building our own recycling facility? Right. But that would require some voter approval or some, just to set the stage for that.
Yeah, no, certainly, Mayor, and that's why right now we authorized the department working with engineering to go be doing all the conceptual schematic design so that we can have a better sense of, can we, is there enough room to lay this out at the East Mesa Service Center, and how does that interface with, there's a lot of other departments have operations out there. So we're kind of doing that due diligence. The location at Pecos, we're trying to work because, as you know, there's a proposed rail line that's going through that area, and one of the options is splitting our property in half, and so we've got to figure out from engineering how that works too. So we're doing all that work, Mayor, to come back to the council at some point to say, okay, yes, these make sense. Here's how much they're going to cost. Here's how much we're going to finance them for.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to give you a pat on the back, saying these are three things that I think are very important that we get a lot more public outreach on. So thank you for doing that. But I see that as being a very important and big project citywide that I hope we're dedicating the proper amount of resources.
Yeah, we can keep Alice conversation. And I think Frank McRae brought up a good point too, Mayor. We really need to also work on energy conservation. Because the commodity cost that gets passed on to the users is becoming significantly costly. So we probably need to include that. I know that Scott, it's his responsibility, but that as part of to your point, as far as a citywide messaging, these three, and that will probably be something that we need to really come up with a plan for.
Yeah, that was the first I'd heard today of rising energy prices. We keep hearing that with all the renewable cheap energy coming online, that don't worry about it, we can buy all the cheap electricity we want, but that's not what I'm hearing today.
It's not the case, and as we're actually, and we need to come back to council. The natural gas, we got hit with a major bill, and we're still negotiating that. We haven't passed it along yet. We're trying to hold on to it and spread it out over a long period of time. We didn't think it was fair. It hit our customers big time. But on the electric, last year we were impacted because of what was happening in California, and so we're seeing that. We used to be able to be very competitive, get very competitive rates, but they're just not there anymore. And I think we're not the only utility. It's across the country. So we just need to prepare our residents for that cost that's going to be passed on to them and helping them find ways to conserve energy.
Well, I know the Vice Mayor has a question, but I just want to add this to the list. Last week we were talking about really some exciting things that the police and fire department are doing with the changing the paradigm on responding to mental health questions. And I said, outside of the context of budget discussions, please come back to us, a month or two from now, because we want to know more about that. We want to be more engaged in that. I would just put these topics on that list as well: the recycling, the climate action plan, and the water conservation, as things we'd like to be more engaged and more supportive of.
Sure.
Because I think they're priorities for us.
Yep.
Vice Mayor.
A question, heat mitigation, is that something that we're wrapping into the climate action plan, or are we claiming that as, you know, a goal as far as cooling stations, what residents can do, how it affects our lower income neighborhoods. There's a lot of issues and there's a lot of studies, especially ASUs, leading projects, designs, a lot of discussion on that. And I didn't know how it fit in and if we're addressing it.
Yes, heat mitigation we anticipate will be, and don't even anticipate, it will be part of the climate action plan and the work that we're doing. And Vice Mayor Duff, you hit on that we're currently doing work with ASU and different studies that are happening in West Mesa and looking at how we can mitigate the urban heat island effect. And really, one of the discussions that we had at SAT is that, you know, the categories that we're going to have laid out in our climate action plan, they cross over with each other. So, you know, mitigating heat also helps with reducing energy use. And so if you look at those two things, it's those, you know, you have to look at, it's very complex systems, but they all affect each other. And so that's one of the ones that we are going to be looking at in detail as part of the climate action plan. And then just along those lines with the climate action plan, also in anticipation that electric vehicles will be part of that, where we'll be switching the fleet over to electric. We are working with Fleet, Energy Resources, Salt River Project on what infrastructure would be needed for that. So it's different infrastructure that will be needed from what are typical gasoline and diesel vehicles. And so we're starting to work on what that would look like as far as infrastructure that would be necessary in anticipation of those light duty vehicles being available in the future. Significant changes
Excuse me, Scott.
Yes.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Did I zone out? What is the Dobson underground storage tanks?
Oh, I'm sorry. Those are, so we have, it kind of builds on, that's part of our infrastructure for the old fleet vehicles that we have. So those were the last two single-walled diesel and gasoline tanks that we had left. They're underground storage tanks that were left at the Dobson Ranch substation. We have removed those tanks. There's indications that one of the tanks had leaked some, and so we're working with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to get closure of that site and make sure that all the remediation is done correctly. And I also should point out that we were successful in getting reimbursement of almost $500,000 from Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for the work that we've done so far at that location. So the environmental staff has been very aggressive in making sure that they take advantage of state programs. And that's one of the reasons why we pulled out these tanks at this time, is we knew that there was funds available from the state, and it was a good opportunity to make sure we leverage those available funds.
Hey, Scott, what's the overall cost of removing those tanks?
So far, that's what I believe that has covered almost 100% of the removal costs so far. We're waiting on some analytical data to come back, and we're doing some drilling there. Once we have that information back, then we'll know what next steps will be needed, if any other next steps are needed. There might be an ability to either close the site as it is, or there might be an additional amount of remediation that has to happen, but we're waiting on sample results from.
So those tanks were in an enclosure, from what you said earlier?
Well, yeah, they were single-walled tanks. So now what we build, they're either double-walled or we put them inside of vaults is what we do. And even at the police and fire stations, we have taken to doing above-ground tanks, smaller tanks that are above ground. So that way you don't have that issue of a tank leaking and not being aware of it because it's underground and you're not able to see it.
Yeah, thank you.
So significant changes for fiscal year 21-22. With the growth that's been happening in Southeast Mesa, we are looking at doing a boundary change. Just to kind of give you a visual, we have 3 zones that we pick up our trash and recycling from within the city. One zone, with our western zone, runs from Dobson Road to Gilbert. Our central zone is from Gilbert to Power Road, and then our eastern zone goes from Power to Meridian. With this boundary change, we're anticipating that actually Power Road will no longer necessarily be that eastern boundary, that you'll actually have areas that are east of Power Road that are going to move into the central zone. And it's simply because there's so much growth that's happening in Southeast Mesa, we have to, in order to balance out the number of routes that we have, so that we have a balance of operators and trucks that are needed on a daily basis. And this is something that we've been doing for years. We continue to move stuff from the east to the central and then from the central over to the west side just to make that balance happen. It's just unique, having grown up here in Mesa, to think that Power Road now is not that eastern boundary is amazing to me, because Power Road was the middle of nowhere previously.
So what he's really telling you, it's either Thursday, Saturday, or what is it? He's telling you the days of pickup too, right?
Yes, this will affect the days of pickup.
He uses boundary changes. I keep thinking, okay, do I have to take my garbage out on Saturday, or, because he just changed my boundaries. So what, that's what we're talking about. And that's what we'll have to work with neighborhoods on, right? Because that's where the rub comes, is like, why are you changing my day that I have to put the recycling out of the garbage? So that's coming, is what we're saying, so.
Yes, yes. So we'll be prepared. And again, that same group that does the public outreach on the recycling, fantastic group. They'll do the public outreach associated with making sure that residents are aware well ahead of time, and then even we will continue to send them reminders to make sure that they're aware, and then we'll work with them as we start to make those changes and put those in place. We're anticipating that will happen in October of this year. Okay. We do have a new stormwater permit from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. We don't anticipate major changes, but there are some changes within inspections that we have to do of our stormwater infrastructure that will come with that. We have a pretty large lighting project, retrofit project, that we're working on with the partners down at the Greenfield Water Reclamation Plant. Another project will save money and saves on energy costs. Facilities automation, when we talk about the reduction of energy use that we've seen in buildings in all sites, these are these two examples with the work that we've done, again, with facilities and parks, and then with water resources to reduce energy use. And, you know, significant change will be having a climate action plan that we intend to bring forward to council for your approval. And then working through those aspirational goals and making sure that we're coming back and measuring our progress and reporting back to the council on that progress. Enhancements for next fiscal year, we have one growth automated side loader that we're adding. That's the ones that that's the trucks that pick up the barrels, so residential barrels. We have some cameras that are on the trucks that the maintenance contracts had a little bit of an increase. And then with increased trucks that we have, as we start to add more and more trucks, we have had some maintenance increases with the CNG contract that we have for the fueling station. So with that, I'm available for any more questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Council, questions for Mr. Boucher? Thank you, Scott. We could literally talk about all of those topics all day long. We look forward to additional discussions after the budget hearings. Yes, Mr. Freeman.
Thanks, Mayor. So, Chris, you answered my question about Pecos and Sossaman, who owns the land. And then I thought, well, what a great way to move recycles on the railroad going through there.
I guess that's a possibility. We'll have a site.
I mean, so we own the city owns the land.
The land where it's still working, right? But I think all council's heard about the pirate or whatever, that the side, what do you call this? Is it a side track? Spur. Sorry, that comes off, and it's really to help service some of our big industrial groups that are further east of there. But yeah, to come off that main line, our property is very close to that main line, so we've offered to be that, you know, property that where it would almost almost like a diagonal split. But we've also tried to work with it so that it retains enough acreage that it could work for the MRF, I guess, our MRF. But we have to make sure, right? That's part of why we're doing the studies. But yeah, that's the plan. We've had that land down there for years, and so this seems like a good opportunity. One, help the rail line come through and still retain enough property to put in this.
What's the acreage there are you looking at?
You know?
I do, but I don't recall exactly.
Okay. I'll have to get back to you.
That's
it's
okay.
significant. We think it's significant. We think it's enough. It's just, it's the odd shape that it's going to create, make sure we have access.
Well, I think creating a MRF there, you know, in the southeast part of the city, and recycling there and doing maybe the regional concept as we discussed before is something to consider.
I think what Scott will come back and talk about is we have some options, right? But we want to there's a kind of a feeling on our side of making sure we kind of control some of our options too.
Yeah,
So, but it comes at a cost, so we're trying to make sure we understand what those are and what the benefits would be to us. So that's what we want to get back to council on.
Well, we got to take care of ourselves first.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Scott. We look forward to.
I just wanted to tell you how much I loved seeing all your successes and going into detail about all of that since, I haven't been here all last year. So this is really a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, other comments for Mr. Boucher? All right. Thank you, Scott. Next, we'll hear from our Water Resources Department.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Jake West, Water Resources. Today I have with me Chris Hassert. He's our Assistant Director, and he does a lot of the stuff with all of the crews out in the field with doing our operations. And Seth Weld is Deputy Director, and he's in our Enterprise Services group, and so they're going to go right through our presentation for you this morning.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Council. We'll jump right into it. Our first slide is an overview of our water system. There's a lot of bullets there, and you're getting hit with a lot of figures today, so I won't walk through all of those, but it just really illustrates the size and scope of our system, so you have that for your reference. Okay. Before we get into some of our cost numbers, we wanted to touch on our key performance indicators, at least a couple of those in water. The first one is fire hydrant maintenance. I'll explain those percentages. 4.2% means that any given month, our crews are going to do preventative maintenance on 4.2% of the hydrant population, which is a little over 20,000 hydrants. So that means over a 24-month or a 2-year cycle, we're going to be able to do preventative maintenance on every hydrant in the system. How we're doing this fiscal year, we're way ahead of that pace. We're at 6%. So that's roughly 1,200 hydrants per month versus 850, which is our target. Now, the reason behind that is a couple of years ago, we were falling way behind. So it was taking us about 2.6 years to get through the full population of hydrants. So we put in a request for 2 field workers. That was granted, thankfully. And our goal was to get back to at least to that 24-month cycle and maybe a little bit ahead of that so we could buy ourselves some time to grow into that. And we've exceeded our expectations because right now that 6% represents about a 17-month cycle. So we're way ahead of where we wanted to be. The next key performance metric has to do with beneficial use of water. We're underperforming in that area, and that speaks to the need for the Central Mesa reuse pipeline because that shortfall is almost exclusively attributed to the fact that the Northwest plant, the destination for recycled water is the Grusp recharge basins. But unfortunately, when you get a lot of mounding in that area, Grusp shuts down. They're not taking any more water. So what that forces us to do is direct that recycled water out into the Salt River Basin. So it's really a double hit we take. We don't get any credits for that. That water is really just essentially flushed down the river, literally. And then And also, we're not getting beneficial use of that water. So by putting the pipeline in place, not only are we making beneficial use of all that recycled water, but we're getting, in exchange for that, we're getting those very valuable CAP portfolio credits. So we talked about preventative maintenance with fire hydrants. This first budget request goes to actual fire hydrant replacement. And the real driver here is that we have a pretty sizable backlog, and it's growing in terms of fire hydrant replacement. And of course, fire hydrants are very essential for public safety. We have to have operable fire hydrants. Now, no fire hydrant replacement, no two are created equal. So by and large, most of those are well suited for our crews. They're on local streets or minor arterials. Our crews get in there. They know what to do. They can take care of it. But we do have some fire hydrants that, for instance, you might have one right at the base of an ADOT exit ramp, and we might have to replace the lateral, and we have to go across 3 lanes of traffic, and we have to get permits with ADOT. We have to reach out to businesses and restaurants and say your water might be down for a couple hours, and it's very time intensive. So what we want to do is use those additional funds to hire some trusted contractors that we work with that they do this kind of work every day. It's not our crew's core function, but they do this all the time so that we could split our efforts on hydrant replacement and we could really chew down that backlog.
I have a question. Thank you, Mayor. Are hydrants cast? I mean, the manufacturers, are they able to supply your hydrants? Is there any in the industry?
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, we're doing pretty well. Clow is the manufacturer we use primarily right now, and we haven't had any problems right now sourcing those hydrants. We're doing pretty well.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to jump over to one of the probably the bigger items in our overall water budget, and that's water commodities. So this is the raw water that we purchase to treat and then distribute to our customers. What looks a little different this year in terms of years past when we looked at this table is we're showing two lines for CAP, for CAP. We're showing a tier 0 scenario, which is what we're in right now in terms of, well, the tiers, I think you know, but just in case, the tiers represent the action level on shortage or drought. We're in tier 0 right now, but it's highly likely that next calendar year we're going to be in tier 1, which is very notable because tier 1 would be the first time that's ever been declared on the Colorado River. The Colorado River Compact was executed in the 1920s. The Hoover Dam was built in the mid-1930s. So we're 90 years down the road. This will be the first time we're ever staring down a tier 1 drought shortage. Now, it won't short the cities, in particular Mesa, on water per se, but the cost is going to go up per unit, per acre foot. And the reason is they're going to sell less water, less acre foot of water to customers, but there's a set amount of fixed costs, such as paying back the federal government for the loan to build the CAP canal in the first place. Those kind of fixed costs don't go down. So that'll force the unit cost up. So we're showing a couple different scenarios for both next fiscal year and then giving you a window into the following 3 fiscal years. So there could be a cost impact to us if we do in fact go into tier 1 and stay there. Lastly, on water, I want to hit some of our higher level cost items. We have this joint venture or partnership with Phoenix for the Val Vista Water Treatment Plant. We're looking at about a 10% or a $700,000 increase there. That's primarily driven by the fact that we're planning to take and treat more water through Val Vista next year because we want to make use of the new conservation space water, the NCS water that's impounded behind the Roosevelt Dam. Mesa made the wise decision years ago to take part and be an owner of that. So we had a wet year a few years ago that filled up the lake almost to capacity. That gave us some acre feet of water, of NCS water, and now we want to cash in on that next year, so to speak. And we want to it's cheaper water too. It's cheaper water, so we want to make use of that. And then the other nice thing is we can deliver that water anywhere in the system, even though it's coming through the SRP system. Just because of the nature of that water, we can push it over into the eastern part of the city, where more expensive CAP water traditionally meets those needs. The next slide is going to shift us to wastewater. So before we go there, if you have any more questions on water per se.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
You knew I was going to ask about water, right? Well, here I go. So we're entering, I guess, this next fiscal year, the first year of the DCP action plan and exercising that. It's been in place. So going forward, as we look into the coming years, projecting our costs, is there any estimation as far as assuming that we will continue year after year in the DCP plan, taking the next, cycle after the other, the next step after the other. And each step, I think, becomes more restrictive and there's more cuts and costs are impacted on that. So do you have any projections on what is the next step? Is it static for a few years or is it just 1 year? And how does that impact our supply and budget?
Vice Mayor Duff, are you asking in particular, do you think we're going to stay in tier 1 or is it possible to slip to tier 2?
Right.
It's possible. I suspect, this is just my feeling, we would stay in Tier 1 for a couple of years. There's about a 25-foot band, depth band in Lake Mead that would take us from 1075, which all the models predict will cross 1075, get slightly below that before the end of this calendar year. So January 1st of 2022, all likelihood will be in Tier 1. I feel we'd be there for a couple years, but if we get more winters like this winter, we had a pretty thin snowpack. We're getting a pretty hot, dry spring. You could be in Tier 2 in a couple of years. It wouldn't take much to go down 25 feet. And then the shape of the reservoir, because it's trapezoidal, as you go down, you can move quicker pretty fast. So I would point to Seth. Seth, what would you think would be the impact if we were to go to Tier 2 in terms of, like, say, % increase per acre foot?
Vice Mayor Duff, when CAP kind of put out their projections and their projected costs, and I also want to note with this that the CAP board begins their annual meetings this month. So we're working on numbers that we saw a year ago, and these numbers can certainly change. But the difference runs anywhere between 2 and 5% in unit price for each tier. Okay. So it's significant. And so to the point of the Central Mesa reuse pipeline, that's why it's so critical we get that in place. We get that in place, we can exchange that effluent water for CAP water, but it's at a higher priority and a lower unit price.
Well, I understand and the need of getting that central pipeline done, and certainly as we face these challenges. As far as the CAP, and that's the other question, is what percentages do we rely on CAP water? And will we be impacted on the CAP water as far as the supply, just the CAP? I know we have other sources of water.
Vice Mayor Duff, I can answer that. So our portfolio, our raw water portfolio, is pretty split pretty equally right now. Now that the more recycled water we send to the Gila River Indian community, we start bumping up our cap part of our portfolio. Right now, we're about 63,000 acre foot of rights for the CAP system, and we're about the same number, just coincidentally, for the SRP system. And then we have groundwater credits. We have over 500,000 acre feet of stored underground credits, which is really substantial. But we consider that's our bank. We don't like to tap into the bank if we don't have to. In terms of actual usage on any given year, we have a lot of buffer on the SRP side. We have a lot we can grow into. We could add density in this part of town. That wouldn't be a problem. It's thinner on the CAP side. So to answer that question in a kind of a long roundabout way, we're over 50% any given year in terms of what we're serving our customers. We're probably closer to 60%. Brian Draper would know probably more exact, but we're in that 60% to maybe 2/3 of CAP deliveries right now.
Okay. Well, we'll learn more after the board meeting, I guess, as far as what we expect for the years coming.
Right, we pay close attention to the board meetings and everything going on at CAP and ADWR.
Thank you.
So for wastewater, we're showing a similar high-level overview. This is just a snapshot of the system. We're going to
real quick.
Sure.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Going back. Thank you, Mayor. I think Jim brings up a point that we probably ought to start looking at too. Is that we have capacity on the Salt River side more so than on the CAP side, and so we need to maybe start looking at a way to bring SRP water into the northeast and southeast portion of Mesa to help offset some of that CAP, offset the CAP cap, I guess, that we have out in the developing areas. We have the excess in the northwest part of Mesa with SRP. We just got to get it out to the east side of Mesa now. Help offset all the CAP. Anyway, that was all I had.
Right, thank you. Councilmember Thompson, so that is part of our plan for next fiscal year is to take delivery of some of our stored NCS water. Again, that's water that is flood water behind the Roosevelt Dam that we're entitled to. We're gonna take delivery of that at the Val Vista plant, treat it, and we are gonna move that into the cap service area. And we'll try to take advantage of that anytime we can. For the key metric we wanted to talk about on the wastewater side are sanitary sewer overflows. Going by the industry, an acceptable measure, of course we'd like to have zero because this is something that is, the public is, it's very visible to the public. Anytime you get a sanitary sewer overflow. Per the industry, 1 per 100 miles would be, you want to stay below that. For us, that would be about 18. We have about 1,800 miles of sewer. Traditionally, we've done much better than that. We've been well under that metric, so we didn't want to have 18 be our target. We wanted to be more aggressive, so we decided we'll try to get around half, and a number that worked for us would be 2 per quarter or 8 per year. Right now, we're doing half that, so we're 3 quarters into this fiscal year. We've had 3 SSOs, so we're doing very well in that respect. So getting into, there's 2 specific budget requests we have on the wastewater side this year. One is for 2 operators at the Greenfield Reclamation plant. We just finished that large expansion, as you know, so we expanded the plant from 16 MGD up to 30, so we've almost doubled the capacity of that plant. It's the 3rd largest reclamation plant now after that expansion in the state of Arizona. It's also a pretty sizable plot. It's over 40 acres, so it's a lot of ground to cover for our operators. And as we've gotten through the expansion, our assessment is that we're pretty thinly staffed. And given that it's an end-of-the-line plant, which means there's no backup, at the northwest and the southeast plants, they're not end-of-the-line plants. We can do bypass operations. We can move water away from those, but we don't have that option at Greenfield. So given our current staffing situation, we feel the need to request 2 additional operators. Our second request is also at the Greenfield plant. This is our joint venture plant, so you see a one-time cost of a little bit over $1 million, but Mesa share, which is 42%, is, what's the number we're showing there? For about $450,000, so that would be Mesa's share. There's several bullet points. I won't get into those because it's hard to glamorize sludge and scum pumps. So just suffice it to say, this is equipment that it's worked hard 24/7, 365. It's in very nasty, aggressive environments. And if we wait too many months to refurbish it, you kind of get over that hump to where you can't refurbish it cost effectively anymore. You're stuck in a situation where now it's a capital project and we don't want to go there.
Chris, the good news is we've just expanded it. You have a brand new expanded plant, but the other part of it is the existing plant is now, how old now? It's 15 years old. So we need to go, so now we have the capacity to use the new extended plant. We can use that, but why we can go in and do some significant maintenance in the plant that's 15 years old. Is that the plan?
Right, that's fair to say, and that 15-year mark is noteworthy because a lot of this equipment that does work in that aggressive environment 24/7, it has a life expectancy of maybe 12 years to 15 years. So you can see we're already hitting that first milestone where we're turning over equipment. The last slide we have today on the wastewater is also looking at our high-level cost items. Greenfield is one of our partnerships with the towns of Gilbert and Queen Creek. We're actually asking for a reduction. We don't typically show this too often in an operations budget, but we feel confident we can have a reduction because there were some one-time costs this current fiscal year we're not going to experience again next year, so that leads to the reduction, even though there are typical inflationary pressures. The net is going to be a reduction. At 91st Avenue, we're looking at a very small increase because we sent more wastewater to 91st Avenue this year, so we're actually going to reduce how much we send next year. But then on the flip side, you do have your typical inflationary costs like labor increases and other things like that. So we're still net going to have a small increase at 91st Avenue.
Again, Mayor and Council, quickly, that's maybe for Julie. This is a plant that's in Phoenix. So you have Phoenix and I don't know how many.
5 cities.
5 other cities that are participating in there, so this is just our portion of the cost.
Right, so it's a cost we experience year in and year out, and this is that's a pretty small increase. So I would say that's good news. And then chemicals and electricity, these go hand in hand. They're both of these numbers are tied to retiring of a UV system. So UV is very electricity energy intensive. So we're going to see savings next year in our electric budget, but in the chemical budget, because we are switching from UV to sodium hypochlorite. Well, that's a chemical, so now we're going to see a slight increase in chemicals. So those almost offset each other, but I just wanted to make note that it's attributed to retiring our UV system. And with that, on wastewater or water, we're open for any questions.
Thank you. Council, questions on this presentation? Thank you, gentlemen. I think we've reached our time limit too. I know we have some other pressing appointments we need to go.
Frank is always, but he had a few opportunities today to come up anyway. But
that's right.
We'll reschedule him and bring him back.
We're looking forward to getting the full Frank at our next meeting. The next item on our agenda is to acknowledge receipt of the minutes of the Audit, Finance, and Enterprise Committee. Is there a motion? Thank you, Vice Mayor. Seconded by Mr. Luna. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Thompson, I saw you vote aye, right? Yes. That passes unanimously. Next item is our current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Gentlemen, feel free. Yes, Mr. Luna.
Yeah, just real quick. Yesterday, you and I, was it yesterday? We went to Falcon Field Airport and celebrated their monument sign. So if you're by Falcon Field on McKellips, between Greenfield and Higley, going to the airport, you'll see a nice welcoming sign. So that was really
It's very beautiful. Well done. Mr. Freeman, I saw you push your button. Is that a...
Yeah, I turned it off, but
okay,
I'll turn it back on.
Thank you.
So I had the opportunity to work with some of the council members at the pod. We did the vaccine, volunteered over there. Councilmember Luna spent several hours there, and I'm going to give a shout out to all the volunteers and Mesa Fire personnel who delivered, and it was phenomenal. It was like over 4,000 vaccines in a day, and that's been increasing. Every time we've been delivering that. Had an opportunity to go out to see one of the new fire trucks, fire apparatus, our ladder truck, Ladder 204, with the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Heredia. And that was, I like seeing fire trucks and the new change in the apparatus, and it's quite phenomenal. The crew there did an outstanding job. Thank you, Chief Johnson. And then this week is Animal Control. Shout out for them. It's National Animal Control Week for the officers that take care of our pets and any animals in our city. So thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Luna, I know you need to go, so.
Yes. Are you done, Vice Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, because I'm like, oh, I don't want to. On Saturday, I attended a neighborhood block party in part of the Sherwood district, or I think it's a historic district, and with Mesa Prevention Officer Lindy Moreno about safe practices for creating a block watch for the neighborhood. And I just wanted to tell anybody in the neighborhoods in my district, if you are having a block party, a get together with your neighborhood and want to talk about any issues that we can work together to help your neighborhood, just please email my office, and I'd love to stop by and get involved in making those improvements. Also, I want to thank Chief Mary Camelli for taking me out to Dexcom yesterday to tour the facility. I was overwhelmed and blown away, and then we stopped by the Mesa Convention Center and did a thank you to all the volunteers and staff there. It's tremendous what we have going on. The Dexcom is it's an indoor facility, air-conditioned. It's a drive-through, so the amount of coordination between like 5 different entities to make that happen is incredible. I attended the West Mesa Business Alliance virtual meeting yesterday. It's the first one we've had in quite a while. And Rio Reimagined, which is the riverway that they're looking at expanding across our Riverview area into West Mesa. So there's an update on that, as well as projects of the West Mesa Heat Mitigation Plan. And there's economic development updates with our Bill Jabjiniak, and Councilmember Heredia attended as well. Last night I was on Main Street with Visit Mesa. They hosted a group of influencers to talk about all the great things that are happening downtown. We did a tour of the restaurants and breweries, ended up with some proof bread. It was delightful and a very good turnout. There's a buzz about downtown and the word's getting out, and look for it on social media. Maybe one of the people that you follow will be posting about it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Council, anything else? Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I just wanted to do a couple of shout outs. One this week is also National Dispatcher Week. So a big shout out and thank you to both our fire and police dispatchers. They're typically the first call that everybody makes when they call 911. They're the voice of Mesa. So thank you for all they do. The next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is the state legislature did a proclamation commending recyclers, and I just wanted to remind everyone that two of Arizona's largest recyclers are in District 6. One is CMC Steel, which is the largest metal recycler in Arizona, and the other one is CRM Crushed Rubber, who is the largest tire recycling operation in Arizona. So big shout out to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Council, anything else you'd like to share with us? All right, Mr. Brady, what does our schedule of future meetings look like?
Thank you, Mayor. We will have continue our budget discussions in a study session prior to the council meeting on Monday the 19th. So starting at 4:45, we'll have presentations from the Transit Department and Transportation. And then just so council, I know you're anxious to hear, looking forward on the 22nd, we will include part of, we'll have some budget discussions. We'll also be covering food truck licenses, peddler's license, special event licenses, and business licenses. So we'll have all that for you on the 22nd.
Those are topics that have been around for a few years. It'll be good to have some progress on those. Thank you. If there's nothing else, council, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Mr. Freeman and Ms. Pillsbury. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned.